Well, hello everyone. This is Marsha Sinetar again, and I'm so happy to invite you and welcome you to the next conversation, the one that's just forthcoming, about creative thought, about some of the renewal requirements of those of us, and I think we're all born creative, until it's ruined out of us, trained out of us, the thought strategies of those of us that are creative. And these involve a certain kind of rest and renewal, and that's what I'd like to talk about in this little introduction and that you'll hear about in the following conversation. So the first point that I'd like to make is that people who are very creative, and I include among those artists and inventors and contemplatives who have that transcendent impulse. And of course, nothing is more creative than that transcendent encounter. So I also call the entrepreneur a business artist because these are unusual business influencers. They're not just managers. They're also leaders of a certain sort. And all you have to do is look around and see people who are inventing business processes, new materials, all sorts of explorations that we know nothing about until they hit the market through the activities and energies of these artists. And they are artists. They're just using a different kind of medium, the medium of ideas, the medium of materials, the medium of products, to create something new and something exciting that has never been before. And the first point, as I say, that I wanted to make is that there are certain skills, mental skills, that creative people have, and I include all creative people, not just business people. It's called abstracting, or conceptualizing, or we could call it visioning. And what this is a kind of big picture grasp of something that needs to happen through them individually, for the greater good, or perhaps through their life as a creative, let's say, contributor. Now, what are the thought strategies, the tactics that those of us who are creative use in order to draw out some of the things that we want to accomplish, whether it be of a meditative sort, which, as I've said before, is not a passive activity. It's very energetic. It's very expansive. And yet, perhaps through meditation or prayer or mulling and pondering over something, the work gets done. It's different in every case, and that's the majesty of it. So the thought strategy that business and inventors and other creative people use, it's only one of many that I hope to develop in the coming weeks. The thought strategy from early life is renewal, a kind of creative rest, a kind of creative drawing up out of oneself, or being shown out of oneself. The house not built with human hands. So this is from the transcendent divine realm. Whatever vocabulary people use, and as I've said throughout these recordings and all of my written work, it is not just a religious language that describes such things. In fact, many of the people who I've interviewed and researched for all of my work, they wouldn't call themselves religious by any stretch of the imagination, and yet they will all admit that in the deepest aspects of their thought, their intent, their reveries, something happens through them that they can't quite put their finger on. All right. So the thought strategy we're going to develop today is what creativity researchers call a network of interests or a network of enterprises. And the network of enterprises are dissimilar activities to their original calling. Let's say the calling is computer science or theology or parenting, which is definitely a vocation. All right, it may not be the predominant one, but in this case, let's say it is. So the individual will turn to dissimilar activities to have a time out from the original work in order not to get overwhelmed with ideas, in order to pull out new insights, new inspirations, a new vision, or the next steps for that vision. You know, in Scripture we read that if we lean not to our own understanding, and by that I think the verse means not our human understanding, that God will direct our path. So that deeper, highest wisdom will direct our path if we can just let go of our clinging to the practical or material or grunt work of everyday life. So the network of interest, let me give you some examples. It's said that the writer Alex Haley completed his book Roots while on a train trip. That the writer Joseph Conrad wrote while on monastic sea voyages. They were monastic in type because he was kind of housed away in a little cabin, and there he had the privacy and the silence and the quiet motion of the sea, and sometimes probably not so quiet, to help him cull out and pull out these new ideas, inspirations, and stories that he gave us all. In the book Developing a 21st Century Mind, I talk about something called positive structuring, and I hope you can find that book, but at any rate, I tell about my own experiences when I was in business and a kind of teaching, counseling, advisory position, and I would use real estate, the buying of old, dilapidated, and I'm talking old, tear-down type of houses, structures, gut them, add rooms, walls, move windows, just redo the entire thing, and I used that unconsciously at the beginning, and later it became clear to me that what was happening is that I was being shown the house not built with human hands, by which I wanted to create a kind of life that I hadn't known before, a kind of service that I hadn't dreamed of before. Not only real estate, but other things have helped me through the years and still helps me. So with that, the network of interests, the network of enterprises, dissimilar activities by which we pull out our next steps, our inspirations, we cultivate a predominantly creative thought skill of abstracting, visioning, conceptualizing what our life and our service to others, or we could say to self and to others, is all about. So with that, I hope you enjoy the next conversation. It's with a friend of mine who's a wonderful businessman, and he has many different interests, and you'll hear in his language, not mine, some of the things that I've been talking about. And with that, I wish you well. I hope you wish me well too, and I encourage you to send me feedback if you hear this, if you enjoy it, if you have other ideas, personal stories. Enjoy. I want to welcome you to another conversation, and today I'm so happy to be talking with a longtime reader and friend, distant friend, John Rossini. And John is the director of an international trading company, the finance director, I think. He'll tell us about that. He also has a lot of entrepreneurial interests, including, I think, side businesses and interests. And today we're going to be looking at some of the links between a very creative, busy life and the kind of self-renewal that we've been talking about in some of our other conversations. So with that, welcome, John. I'm happy to be talking with you again.
Thank you, Marsha. I'm glad to be here.
Well, great. So let's start talking a little bit about how you got the idea to merge your avocation with travel, which I understand is just a tremendous love of yours, and finance.
Right, right. Sure.
How'd that come about?
Sure. Yeah, I've been very fortunate to be in a position where I travel often and also mix that with some hard-nosed business dealings. And the way this came about is, how does one think in a contemplative way, actually, and you can break that down in a few areas. In one area in particular comes the area of direction. Say, where do you want to go?
Right.
And from a contemplative standpoint, I think there are two things to keep in mind. One is that you just sort of have to ask yourself the question, what do I really love to do? What direction do I want to go in? What gets me excited?
Right.
And then the other thing is, you're sort of like, well, when do I ask those questions? We all can get caught up in the frantic day-to-day operation of either our lives and or our businesses,
right?
And we don't get a chance to do that. So two areas come to me as to when I get to do those, and one is that I do make time for regular exercise. I've been a martial artist for years, although I don't compete anymore. Mm-hmm. And the other is actually taking the time to travel alone. And with both those opportunities on the exercise side of things, what happens is when you're done with your session and you're tired,
right?
Allowing you some space to rest rather than jumping into a new activity, and to just ponder those thoughts about what do I really love to do, where do I want to be. There's a space there where those old ideas will come to you.
Right. That's familiar to me.
Yeah, and I think the other. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say you were just going to jump into that about the renewal part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah. This exercise practice and the ability and the willingness to take some time after it, gives you a chance to disengage from a lot of pressure, and you're sort of off guard a little bit because you're tired.
Exactly.
And that's the contemplative idea, and the areas that you are really thinking about inside start to come out. And I think to follow the theme there is that it's good to then express those at appropriate times, and
right.
and something we've talked about before, that I traveled a lot to Asia even before business really required that, or I was traveling that much for business. And most people would ask me, like, where are these places I'm going? And I'd mention Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and a lot of people thought I was nuts to do this. Everyone wants to go to France, Europe, France, Italy, other parts of Europe.
Right.
But I just sort of forced myself to do it. I wouldn't say forced myself because I wanted to do it, but I just, despite the fact it wasn't mainstream, I did it, and that was a key element of why I have the position I have now. Because when word came, the company that I work for now is very internationally developed. We're in over 60 countries. When they needed someone who had the finance skills that I had, they also need someone who'd be willing to travel anywhere. And my reputation in the marketplace, in the field, was, this guy's crazy. He'll go anywhere. So
yeah. So it worked in your behalf.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, when I used to travel a lot for business, this leads to your comment about kind of decompressing or getting out of the pressurized situation. I used to look forward to traveling because it was a solitary time, and I could use it to read and kind of meditate on things, as you say, that were with me all the time, ideas that were with me all the time, like almost like spiritual companions. So is that sort of the way you used your travel in the early days?
Yeah, I mean, I think it dovetails directly into the second point I was leading to is, one of the other big sort of questions one asks oneself and says, I need help, I need ideas. How am I going to handle? And the big thing is, how am I going to handle this overwhelm?
Yeah.
And one of the ways you get to do that is by traveling. And to some people that might be counterintuitive. You say, well, all the hassle I need to get ready and go. But the truth is, if you especially make time to travel alone, you'd get that time you mentioned on the plane where you're relatively undisturbed. And that can be very valuable. It'll allow you to again, get away from the overwhelm. And the other thing is I can give a very specific example. I traveled about 3 weeks ago to Vietnam and to Thailand. And this was a vacation. I went alone, and prior to this, I'd been working on several projects in addition to running the finance division for the company I work for. And a lot of things just weren't getting done. And I had this chance to be alone, and also it was very physical. I was getting up very early. I was walking long hours. I was taking long swims, and sort of that state of exhaustion, and not having distraction. It like dawned on me. It was so obvious that all the things I was trying to do at the same time was not going to be effective.
Right.
So that really gave me a chance to prioritize and say, okay, I can put these other certain projects on the back burner. I can focus on these other two. And the results, it's only been 3 weeks, but the results have been amazing. I mean, things are starting to come together where had I not gotten away, I don't believe I would have been able to do it.
What you're saying is so valuable to me, and I think to others, that sometimes there's that a kind of clarity that comes when you have I want to say let go. Let go of the idea that you personally are going to force it into place. Because the harder you try, the worse it gets. It's like, that little Chinese or Asian finger puzzle. You put your 2 index fingers in a little tube, and then you try to pull them out, and then it traps your fingers.
It traps you in, yeah.
Traps you in. Okay, that's kind of what our day-to-day effortful life seems like to me. Whereas when you let go, now for me, it's very often meditation or prayer or also walks, those kinds of activities that you've already mentioned. With exercise, I think, being very important also. But it's like that. You let go into that. And on the other side of it, there's that clarity that you talk about.
Right. I think, I think an overarching theme to this, what you and I have both discussed, is that, you know what, Jane? Sometimes you just need to rest,
Exactly.
And how you get there, I mean, for me, I've described the coming off the exercise regimen and or getting out alone, that allows me time to rest. And that will help incubate real valuable ideas. Much better than will be, trying to force the 2 fingers.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing I was going to say, and this conversation might be specifically helpful to those of us who feel guilty somehow. We were taught too well in a way by our families or teachers to be enterprising and industrious. It's almost like a little puritanical streak, so that you can't lay in the hammock a friend of mine talks about raking. She and her husband have a property in Northern California, and they spend a lot of time gardening, and she likes to rake. And she says on the other side of the raking, which she finds a very meditative activity, and it is. It's in fact, I think in Japan, it's in the Japanese gardens, it's an art form to fix up the sand in a certain way. But anyway, the point is that on the other side of the raking, she gets those moments of clarity and a kind of why didn't I do this before? It's so beneficial.
Yeah.
I guess the question I have is, do you sometimes find it tough to just sit around and do nothing?
Yeah, I think there's a way to set up that time in order to get the benefits. I think the fast answer to your question is, if I walked out the door and said, okay, I'm going to sit down and do nothing now, and I hope I get inspiration, or I'm just going to sit down and do nothing. That for me that probably wouldn't work so well.
Yeah.
For me, getting into a new environment, i.e., the travel, or doing something physical beforehand, will automatically steer me into that. And I guess people are different; they have different approaches. But I think it's essential that everyone find that way to get there, to get that space of rest.
Yeah, what I want to say in hearing you is that there's a kind of wisdom. Some psychologists might say it's a body wisdom. Someone else would say it's a spiritual discernment. But there's a kind of wisdom that says, okay, this is what I need, and this is how I'm going to do it. For you, it's the vigorous exercise, then feeling exhausted or tired, and then the kind of floating imagination or vision or whatever that lead. For someone else, it might be raking. For a third person, it might be extreme sports. Some people are into very, I want to say, dangerous sports, almost risk-taking kinds of things like auto racing. But in some studies that I've seen, the concentration needed, skiing is another, not necessarily dangerous, but it's that extreme situation and surfing, where you must concentrate.
Right.
And because you must concentrate, your mind is disengaged from the railroad tracks it's normally on. On the other side of it, then there's that aha, now I see clearly.
Right. Yeah, well, when I was a little younger, I did some of those more dangerous things.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. That does not surprise me.
Yeah.
But was it with the same result?
Yeah, I mean, it plays into the theme we've discussed, is that whitewater rafting was one in particular. I mean, if you ever want to experience, in the moment, let me tell you, when you're in a raft and, people are dependent on you to do your job and you're pounding away at crashing waves and trying to avoid a rock, you definitely leave the busyness behind. And then when you're done and the raft's up on the side of the river and you've just had dinner and it's a little bit before the time you're going to sack out, that's an opportunity for the clarity to come, to the ideas to come, to the questions about direction, priorities.
Right.
Those things will start to come in that time period.
Well, what I find refreshing about this conversation, John, is that people think erroneously that when you talk about contemplation or when you talk about a spiritual kind of life, very often they think about sitting in a Buddhist temple or sitting on top of a mountain in Tibet and just meditating on your navel kind of thing, very passive.
Right.
But it's many different things that can lead each individual uniquely to that real freedom from the traps that our mind sets up. And I'm wondering if that's your experience as well.
Yeah, I think, when some people talk about either meditation or the contemplative methods,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to perhaps get pigeonholed into a certain methodology.
Yes.
And I think we've clearly talked about is that it's not that way. There are many ways to get there, and you really have to do two things. One is, my advice to the audience would be, one is really think about what has worked for you, even what you think will work for you, even if you haven't really tested it.
Yeah.
Go out and do it. And I caution people that, you may get some pushback from people around you. Like, what makes you think you're going to go out and, run around or swim or, get yourself exhausted when you've got plenty of else to do? Or what makes you think you're going to leave office for X amount of days or around the family? And it's likely you'll get some pushback, and you really just have to hold your ground and say, this is what I believe I need. I think if you try to say, well, this is what I know I need, and this is the results I know I'm going to get, you're only setting yourself up for failure.
Well, because you don't know. We don't know.
Exactly.
We're explorers in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing I hear is that not only are we explorers, in our own, I hate this phrase, our own journey, but the experiment seems to come from a reaching for something that we know is there for us. It doesn't mean it's there for everyone, but it's there for us, and it was meant for us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You ask, again, it comes back to some of the questions you ask yourself. You say, what's important to me? What gets me excited? What gets me really motivated?
Yeah.
Those are going to be different things for different people and different ways to get there.
Right. It's a beautiful thing that you've come to that understanding, and that you've done it in such a way that is unique to you, and it's, you're serving so many different people in this way, not only your own interests, but also your work, your friends. Surely they see benefits in your relationships with them when you come back and you're refreshed and invigorated from what you've been doing. It's got to be.
Yeah, you get, you're energized, have more ideas, and I'll go so far as to say that it even helps you get in tune with people in a different way. I'm just going to give a tiny example, only because it's recent, so it's fresh in my head. I like the water. I think people get that idea if they talk to me a bit, that I do swim a fair amount, and I do. My kid brother owns a boat, and we go out every so often. And I just not too far back from one of my trips, and we were talking with a couple of his friends out on the raft. And I was talking about a book, and his friend, some quotes from a particular book. The friend liked it, so I immediately, when I went home, I ordered it for him, and I sent him a copy.
Oh, good.
And you might say, well, that's kind of small, but I think what this reflective, contemplative methods allow you to do, and in particular in my case, traveling alone, is that it entices you in a gentle way to interact closely with people around you.
Right.
And sort of forces you to make a connection. And
Exactly.
I think that connection then carries over. That methodology of connection carries over when you get back home and you're talking to people that you deal with every day. I don't think I would have thought even to do this small gesture. I probably would not have thought about it had I not been just a couple of weeks before out interacting with strangers.
Yeah, I have to say two things about that. First of all, the spiritual wholeness that I'm always talking about, there is a gift related to that, and it is a gift of generosity with people. In other words, it's not only that we are able to receive from people what they have to give us in a kind of grateful way, appreciating what they have, but it's also that we connect with them differently, and we give of ourselves in a different way, which that act of generosity buying the book. It seems like a little thing, but it's a big thing. It really is a bigger thing, because most people might even think it, but then they'll dismiss it. They'll, say to themselves, "Oh no, can't do that." So that's the first thing. And the second thing I want to say is that I do relate to what you're saying in the empathy department, because I know that I have a very different relationship with people that will work around the house or the grounds here, the yard, to the point where they'll bring their children to meet me, or
that's neat.
something like that, or they'll tell me something that maybe they were some little heartache that they might have, and I do care, but it's the thing that you're talking about. The conversations are deeper. I'm not sure if you've felt that.
Yeah, again, we go back to, I think the phrase we could add to this is sort of creating the space. If you're in a habit of, or at least have some regular methodology of creating space in your life, not only will you get the ideas that we have talked about so far, but it'll also allow you to make deeper connections with people around you, and lead to deeper conversations, and lead to a better way for helping each other.
Yeah.
These things don't come about if you're going 100 miles an hour all the time.
That's right.
It doesn't.
Yeah, that's right. And since I know that there are a couple or a few, at least, young business people listening to these recordings, I think this kind of thing, this kind of discussion, creates a space, to use your language, in the workplace for better relationships, better team building. Especially imagine if someone's a manager and has that empathy towards other people, or the creative ideas. So everything you've said is extremely valuable to me, and I hope to those people who are listening to us talk. So I think we're kind of running out of time here on this recording, but I want to thank you for a most valuable input.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Oh, you're welcome.
And thank you for all the great books you've written. I have not missed one. I just double-checked, actually.
Well, I'm thrilled about that, and thank you so much. Okay, well, we'll talk soon again.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
take care.
John.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
John M. Rossini is the credit director for a $3.5 billion international trading company. He also has several diverse entrepreneurial ventures involving chocolate manufacture, publishing, and small business finance. For both business and vacation, John has been to over 30 countries. When he is not on a plane or motorbiking in exotic lands, he resides in New York.